All right, I'm going to go over the FRQ test with Demolition Dan. Now, I have a bit of an issue. There are two videos, there are two versions of this. I did not realize it until I already handed them out. So I know 1A has this one that says 2% here, and I know 1B had 4%. And my first video that I made said 4%, so I'm going to go over the other one. So if you're watching this video and you're like, wait a minute, these numbers don't match, go find the other video. It should be towards the top still. And Demolition Dan, I'm going to put Demolition Dan. This one I'm going to title 2%. So just find the Demolition Dan that does not have 2% in the title. Okay, so on this problem, we have this fella, Demolition Dan, and he makes explosive charges in Hollywood. And anyway, so he will make these explosive charges and then he tests them. And if they're too big, then it explodes and it hurts people. If it's not big enough, then you're wasting takes at the movie studio. So too big or too bad is no good. However, it's not a not equals problem. That was done on purpose to try to use the context to mess up their heads a little bit. All right, so if more than 2% of the explosions are faulty, then he'll send them to another movie studio in another country. Because that's what people do. If it's crap, we just send it to somebody else and let them deal with it. And that's not just in this country. That's every country on the planet does that. So the null is going to be that it is equal to 2. The alternate will be that it's greater than 2, because that's what I'm trying to show. Alpha is 0.05, and P is the true population proportion of Dan's explosive charges that are faulty from his large batch. So just make sure you get that. That's the population. One sample z-test for P. A random sample. 500 is less than 10%. Not assume. We don't say assume at least, because I know the population. So 500 is less than 10% of 7,500. And then I get my expected counts. And calculator time. Stat. Test. 5. And then P is 0.02. And then we had 30 out of 500. And we're trying to show greater than. I don't have to mess with that. It's been greater than a couple times. And then T, I was going to say that's not the best 6 ever, but 6.3, that is a huge z-score. That is like impossibility that it's that. Not really impossible, but dang. That's pretty impossible right there. So could it happen? It could, but it won't. That's what that p-value means. All right, so we got those numbers. And then the p-value of approximately 0 is less than alpha 5. We reject the null. There is evidence of the alternate. And then this was kind of one of my first forays into follow-up questions. And then it was like, okay, not just regurgitate me a conclusion, which is fantastic, and I'm down with you just knowing how to do that. But then let's take it a step further. So what does he do now? Now, on this one, it tells you what to do. Because we rejected, and it is more than 2%, he should send them to another country. But that's way too easy of a follow-up question for 2025 students, so don't get too excited about that. This one, it just says what type could you made, and then it stops. But yours will say what type of could you made and describe it. And you have to give the consequence, even though I want to ask for the consequence. So there. So be ready for that. All right, the next one, vitamin C. It wasn't vitamin C, but there was some funny stuff in Canada when I wrote this. So this is my ode to the Canada mess. And they kind of continue to still have messes. It's kind of funny. Not if you're Canadian. Not if you're Canadian, for sure. Anyway, vitamin C is very important for many factors of good health. In Canada, suggested that not a vitamin C is being consumed. The Canadian Health Organization recommends 90 milligrams of vitamin C daily. I think I actually looked that up. Not for Canadian Health Organization, but just how much you're supposed to have. In a random sample of 40 adults were found to have consumed 85.7 milligrams and 12.4 milligrams. Does this give us enough convincing evidence that Canadians aren't getting enough vitamin C? All right. Problem with the question. It says adult. It says everybody needs this. Adults have this. Are Canadians getting enough? So when we had this, I did not take off for context about adults versus all. Some said all adults in Canada. Some said everybody in Canada. And I took that. There's a horrible, horrible writing because I don't have a committee to edit my tests, and I'm not very good at catching that stuff. Students pointed that out to me, and I appreciate that. I truly don't get upset about that, because I screw up, and I need my fantastic, insanely intelligent and hardworking students to help me out so I can be better in the future. All right, so we had mu is that it's equal to 90. We're trying to show less than 90. 5%. Mu is the true population mean vitamin C intake, probably in milligrams. It's not it's in milligrams. I'm going to go ahead and just get that run real quick. That Canadians intake daily, or adults, we've just talked about that. One sample t-test from you, random sample used. There are more than 400 Canadians. Now, if you say, well, they didn't say that, and I wrote assume, okay, because they didn't say it. But I'm going to go ahead and suggest that it's not a myth that there's 36 million people living in Canada, that it's actually only 399. I'm going to assume that that's not the case. Large counts, 40 is greater than or equal to 30. Calculator time. Stat. Test 2. This one's on the stats half of things. 85.7 was X bar. 12.4 was S sub X. My sample size was 40. I can't see it, but I have it written down as 40. I'm going to go with 40. And we're trying... Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened just there. Stat test 2. Thankfully, it's already all plugged in there. We're trying to show less. And thankfully, I get the same numbers. Yeah, it's been a rough day for a null hypothesis. I've definitely been rejecting more this morning than failing to reject. But anyway, degrees of freedom. Means problems has degrees of freedom. Proportions don't. Don't skip that. Don't skip that. You'll be irritated if you miss that. And since the p-value is less than alpha, we reject null. There's not sufficient evidence that Canadians are getting enough vitamin C. All right, what type of error could you made? This one again, this was my first foray into follow-up questions, so they're kind of stinky. And they're not hard enough, because then we look at tests and go, ugh, that wasn't enough. I want more. I want more than that. We need to get harder so that we're ready for the exam. So there you go. And you say, oh, that's not fair. You're right, it's not fair. The other students got ripped off. You're getting the I'm going to be ready for this exam version. So how about this? What would a type 1 error have actually been? Describe it like we're going to on our test. So we would have said, evidence suggests that there is evidence that Canadians are not getting enough vitamin C. See, I'm going to use this. If I'm going to have to write down the context again, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to come here and write it down. So context, and context. It's so, you can't say it's so nice you got to write it twice and another time. So twice isn't enough. 3 times. 3 times we write the context down. But that's not a problem for us. Irritating, yes. Problem, no. All right. So evidence suggests that Canadians are not getting enough vitamin C when in fact, there is not enough sufficient evidence that they're not getting enough vitamin C when in fact they're not. Or this one, again, maybe we could say they're getting enough vitamin C when in fact they're not. That might be that there's too many negatives in that other sentence. But evidence suggests that they're getting proper amounts of vitamin C when they're not. Consequence, Canadians think they're doing everything right and continue to not get enough vitamin C, and that would not be good for their health. A type 2 error would be that we do not have evidence that they're not getting enough. I'm sorry. A type 2 is when we fail to reject. Yeah, we don't have enough evidence that they're getting less. You know what? I think I might have just screwed that up. So here, let's just scratch that or strike that last part. I wish I could edit these because I would, but let's just make sure I got this right. A type 1 error is when you favor the alternate. We say that, okay, because I misread it. There is sufficient evidence. Okay. Reboot. Type 1 error is when you say you favor the alternate. So we say they're not getting enough vitamin C when in fact they are. The consequence of a type 1 error is that maybe the government wouldn't get involved and start putting vitamin C and all this stuff when they don't need to. That really wouldn't be that bad, though, would it? More vitamin C is not really a bad thing. It might even be a good thing, but it would cost money. Adding vitamin C to stuff is not free, so it would clearly cost. It'd be wasting time and money. Our favorite consequence. The type 2 error is one that favors or works against the alternate. So we'd say that it's not true that we're not getting enough vitamin C when in fact we're not getting enough. So that means that we will continue to not get enough vitamin C and have poor health issues. I apologize very much for saying that wrong. Hopefully none of you stopped. Well, obviously if you got to hear, you didn't stop, but hopefully not too many people stopped while I wrote that one and then quit. But there's a whole nother problem yet, so I doubt it. All right, and then this data problem. And I'm going to type as I go because I didn't have the wherewithal to have this one typed in ahead of time. So this problem is about a fella that owns a seafood restaurant in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Gulf Shores, Alabama is famous for seafood from the Gulf that's south of the United States and mostly to the east of Mexico. It's kind of weird. That's a hot button topic right now, and I'm not going there. So in the Gulf, where Gulf Shores is, again, I've actually never been there. I would like to go there. I'm not the biggest seafood person in the world, but I do enjoy fresh seafood because it's so much better, but a lot of seafood is kind of gross. But anyway, it's insanely competitive. If your food isn't fantastic, you're done. You are out of business like immediately. And there's quality issues. There's all kinds of stuff. So in this one, he has something in the restaurant business, 10-to-1s. When something weighs 1/10 of a pound in the My Limited restaurant experience, everything, they always call those 10-to-1s. I have no idea why. I just remember that. So there is this one. So his tonight's special is 10-to-1s, and they're 1/10 of a pound each, that would be a large shrimp. And people like large shrimps. I like little shrimps that are fried with cocktail sauce. But more breading to the shrimp ratio. But if shrimp are really, really, really good, big fat ones are pretty enjoyable. And if they're fresh, that it will be. So anyway, they're supposed to be 1/10 of a pound each. Sir Shrimpy, that's what I call him. He's got this this supplier named Shrimp Incorporated that he's been using, and he gets great prices. And this happens with restaurants. When you buy stuff from people for a long time, they take care of you because you've been a good customer for them. They want you to stay. So he gets the best prices from any of his competition, and allows him, to make high profits. Okay. But lately he thinks the shrimp aren't big enough. And in Gulf Shores, if the shrimp aren't as big as you say they are, people will stop coming to your restaurant permanently. So that's all in the context there, okay? So we need to make sure our 10-to-1s are really 1/10 of a pound each. And if you look at those numbers, there's a lot of them that are not 1/10 of a pound. Now, they're really freaking close, and I don't think anybody would notice the difference between 1/10 and 0.094, or definitely not 0.099, but that's not the point of the problem. So mu is going to be that it is equal to 1/10 of a pound. The alternate is going to be it's less, because that's what we're trying to show. And mu is the true population mean weight of today's shipment. All of these were picked from today's shipment. This doesn't say anything except it's about today's shipment, the population of interest. So be careful about that. So it's a one sample t-test for mu. A random sample is used. Assume, and maybe he doesn't buy 10-to-1s every day. I don't know. Assume there are more than 120 10-to-1s in the day's shipment. Not swimming in the ocean, but in that day's shipment that he selected from. And then, by the way, don't be writing these red numbers here. That was me making notes to myself because the scales were so wacky when the students made them that you couldn't tell. So that was a little note to myself to know when I drop those lines, where should they be at? Do not draw those on your test. If you do that on your AP exam, they will take points off. They will go from all the way correct to half or half to none. So don't do that. Okay? So anyway, 12 is not greater than 30, so we look at the sample. The sample distribution, no strong skewness, no outliers, no reason to doubt the normalcy of the population. Population, y'all. Population. And then now to get this, I've put in the numbers. So I'm going to go to second y equals. Now I'm going to make an adjustment on mine because I kept both of them in there. So I'm going to switch to L2. Probably you're not going to do that. But I have, if I go back to stat edit, see I have information from an old video here. This is from my current video in L2. So that's why I'm making my stat plot L2. Don't do that unless you also did the same thing. And then zoom 9, always zoom 9. And then we can use the trace feature to bounce around and get those numbers so we can draw a nice graph. No strong skewness, no outliers. And then stat test 2 data. Mu is 0.1 list. Again, I have to make mine L2. I doubt you're going to want to do that. I don't really think I need to explain that all again. We hit enter, and there's our numbers. Sure, shrimpy shrimps are not big enough. That is a bummer. That is a bummer. Because now he's got to go get a different supplier. Because if he keeps buying these shrimps, his customers aren't going to come back. So don't forget degrees of freedom. Don't forget degrees of freedom. And then since the p-value is less than alpha, we reject null. There is evidence that the 10-to-1s are smaller than 1/10 of a pound. So what should he do? He should find a new supplier. And then on the back, I have type 1 and type 2 errors from the previous question. So go back to type 3. Describe a type 1, type 2 error, and describe which one's worse. So again, I didn't say consequence, but I did say which one's worse, which would be comparing the consequences. So type 1, we rejected the null and we said the alternate, which is what we did. We said we had evidence that the shrimp were too small when in fact they're not too small. This means he will spend the time and the money to find a new supplier, and then he's going to probably have to raise his prices and deal with all that. Type 2 is flip the script. So we said evidence suggests that shrimp are too small when in fact they weren't too small. So the other one's going to be evidence suggests that the shrimp are big enough when in fact they're not. So Sir Shrimpy is going to be like, whew, thank goodness. I can still keep buying my wares from Shrimp Inc. and get the best prices, but he will continue to buy shrimp that are too small, probably. Now, maybe that day was just a rough day on the seas and the shrimp were a little bit smaller, but that's not really how that works. So, and again, remember, when we come up with these consequences, yours might not make a lot of sense. It just has to be a rational thought. And then when we say which one's worse and why, compare the consequences. Compare the consequences, you should be fine. All right. And this last one, this one was when we had this test, we used to have quizzes. And on the quiz, I made them do p-value, and everybody stunk it up so bad that I put it as a standalone question on a test. Well, that's not happening on your test, but p-value, interpreting the p-value will be on there. But I wanted everybody that interpreted p-value correctly to get a 105, and everybody who didn't to get nailed and have to retest, because sometimes I'm petty, and there's nobody to stop me from being petty when I want to be petty, even on a test. As long as it's educational, I don't feel too guilty about it. But here it is yet again. You've probably seen it a few times if you're in my class, where you're like, Mr. Hughes was salty when he made this question. I can tell. So anyway, it says on this one, consider the significance level where P is 50% and the alternate is P is 50, more than 50%, where P is the true population proportion of IHS stat students all the way back from 2015. So because I need a big enough sample size who got a 3 or higher. So and say, well, somebody thinks it's like 50-50. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, not us, because we are so superior to all other groups of AP Stat students that 50% is ridiculous. And of course, the p-value is going to be small. Come on now. Why am I going to make a question where it doesn't brag about how much better we are than everybody else? That's just silly. That doesn't even make any sense. So the p-value is 0.00047. So If in fact the null is true, the probability that we got our sample or one that was more extreme is whatever the p-value is. Okay. And again, the structure is if in fact the null is true, the probability that we got our sample or one that's more extreme is blank. And you need to, like, this part, and this is null is true. That's what goes here in context. And it's horrible context. And because this will be a follow-up question like we talked about the last one, it will be the third time you wrote that context and you're going to like it. You're not just going to do it. You're going to be like, oh, I like this. I like writing the same thing down 3 times. But remember, you do get a point each time. So back off and just write it down 3 times. So if in fact the null is true, that the true population proportion of IHS students who got a 3 or higher is 50%, because that's what the math has done. Whatever we set null at, that's what they run the math at 50%. And they said, if this is true, the probability that I got my results is only less than 1,000th of 1%. Oh, no, that would be 0.04. So that'd be less than 1/10 of 1%. I can't believe I just said that wrong. That ain't good. That's low. That is so low that I'm going to say it's not the null. It isn't the null, that it is 50%. I have convincing evidence that we are better than everybody else. I don't need the convincing evidence because and you don't either. We're living it. We live it. So enjoy that. I can't promise you always be better than everybody else in the world, but we currently are in at least in AP stats, probably in several of your AP classes. All right. It was over 20 minutes. I was hoping to get that in under 20 minutes, but it's a little bit over 20 minutes. Study hard, be ready for your test.